Alright, what is up, guys? I am here with the main man, Brian Whitacre, as always. During the Arnold Classic, I pull him out of his bat cave and I make him get in front of the camera for an interview today. So earlier, I posted a question for you guys to ask Brian questions or ask myself some questions, but mainly Brian questions. Put him on the spot to see anything fitness, bodybuilding related, of course. So we're going to dive into those today. Brian, thanks for doing this, obviously.
Absolutely, man.
As always, it's nice to get you out here in front of the camera, and I'm sure the fans will appreciate it just as much as I do. So the first question comes from Rich. He said, anything you do or try to do to focus on when prep hits that grueling point?
Yeah, so first of all, there is going to be a grueling point, right? I mean, for me, the first 10 to 15 weeks are pretty much coast. You get your diet dialed in, you start losing weight, things are going great, and then it gets tough, right? There's something that's going to happen, and that's the one thing I always tell people that are coming up in this sport. I say, you know what? Every prep, something is going to go wrong, and I actually got to the point where I want it to happen earlier in the prep as opposed to later in the prep. So when something goes wrong, I'm like, oh, good, it happened. So now I can kind of relieve myself a little bit. But short answer is, it's a matter of how bad you want it. And so, I think about, for me, my goal, I turned pro in, I guess it was 05, and then I started competing as a pro in 06. And ever since then, I kind of moved up slightly in the ranks, and I had that goal of, someday I want to win a world title. And it took me 10 years, and every year I was still had that goal in mind, and I came up short, and I came up short, and I came up short. And I can't tell you how many nights I went to sleep thinking about that goal, and and when prep gets tough, you have to have that, right? You have to have something that's going to drive you through.
Right, something deeper.
And so I would just say, how bad do you really want it?
Absolutely.
And so of course, other things in life are going to come first, family, job, but you have to be able to have that extra gear to dig to, and it really just comes down to, how bad do you want that ultimate goal?
Right. Do you think that's what separates even the top pros, let's say like third place from a first place guy? Because at the end of the day, although we are all shaped differently, that extra effort that might be put in can bump you up or even get you from getting a top placing.
I absolutely think that mental component is what gives you that extra bit of separation. I mean, you've seen there's so many great physiques out there,
Absolutely.
right? I mean, even just walking around today, the guys' physiques are mind blowing.
Yeah.
But to get to that level of conditioning that you need to be at the elite tier, it's mental. I mean, you know how hard it is when you're getting to prep and you're low on fat, low on carbs, and you have to go do a lot, manual exercise at work or whatever. But it's very challenging, and you have to have that extra gear to dig to mentally. And again, I think a lot of it comes down to how hard are you willing to push?
Right.
What are you willing to do?
Absolutely. Great answer. Kevin asked, I thought this one was pretty funny, but it's getting to a good point. He said, I friend requested Brian 2+ years ago, still waiting on the friend response. So sorry, Kevin.
I really apologize. And I actually told Brandon, I was like, I checked when we went there. Unfortunately, and you guys, you probably know this if you even know who I am. I'm not active on social media, right? I don't get out there much. And so I actually looked before I came up here, and I think it was 1,142 unanswered friend requests.
So Kevin, you're not the only one.
I apologize, man. And let me just give a quick, it's a terrible explanation, but for me, if I'm going to do something, I want to do it right.
Right.
And if I'm going to be on social media and actively participate, I'm going to feel like I need to answer everyone's question. And I can't do it. I hate to say it sounds selfish, but there's other things in my life that take priority to answering other people's questions. This is not my business. I'm not a coach like you are. I love it. I love bodybuilding. It's a huge part of my life. And I really do apologize. I'm not a social media guy, and so maybe I'll try to go in, Kevin. I'll try to find you. Brandon will give me your name, and I'll dig you out of the deep one. And apologize personally.
But Kevin did have a good question to follow up. It was kind of a joke anyway. But Kevin wanted to know why doesn't he do any social media advertising from an economist standpoint, which Brian is. Does it not pass the cost-benefit analysis? So obviously he knows you very well, knows you like economics, so go ahead and...
Yeah, and that's exactly the answer, Kevin. So I'm glad you brought that up. So for me, the benefits do not outweigh the cost. Like I said, if this is part of your job, and again, Brandon and Core has a big social media following, I understand why you do it, and it's part of your job, and it's crucial for your income, your way of life, right? For me, it's not. Again, I compete because I want to challenge myself. I don't compete. I'm not trying to make money out of this. It's just a way that I like to challenge myself. So the cost that I see with myself having to put into it, if I'm going to do it right, again, talking, interacting with people, answering questions on a daily basis, do not outweigh the benefits, which is, again, more people might know about me, but that's not my goal, really, to be honest.
Absolutely. And then Jason had another question for us. He said, I've heard that you use a more intuitive approach to contest dieting that doesn't involve using the scale as the only measure of progress. Is that true? And if so, can you elaborate on that?
So, really good question. First answer is, if you mean the scale as in weighing myself, that is true. I often don't weigh myself a lot during prep.
That's crazy.
But I absolutely weigh all my macros. I know exactly what's going into my body every day, grams of fat, grams of protein, grams of carbs. I manipulate those, again, on a daily basis, just like pretty much everybody does.
Right.
But I'm much more of a visual person when it comes to making changes and dieting down. So, especially those last 3, 4, 5 weeks when you're really getting dialed in. And so, if you're sitting at 3 or 4 weeks out and you're starting to come in, those last couple of lines are starting to come in. If you get on the scale and it goes up 0.5 and you're like, oh God, you can totally freak yourself out. So I don't do that. I just basically rely on the mirror. And then I think about being where I am now is I've got 10 plus years of contest picks, contest prep picks. So I can go back and when I had a really good year in 2013, what did I look like at 3 weeks out? Compare myself and say, okay, I'm not quite as sharp as I was there.
Yeah.
I need to dial it in a little bit more. So it is a little bit more intuitive. And again, I just think the scale can mess with you mentally in those last couple stages. A little bit of water here and there if you don't weigh exactly the same time a day. So that's just, it's a little bit more intuitive, but it's still somewhat scientific, right? I mean, I'm still doing the diet manipulation, but it's just based off more than the scale.
So how frequently would you say that? I mean, besides like the last 3 weeks, let's say like 8-10 weeks out, how frequently are you standing on the scale?
Twice a week. Twice a week, okay. Yeah. And certainly I try to do it at the same time every day. So
same days every week.
Right.
Okay.
And then so you can see kind of week to week, okay, how much did I lose?
Right.
And I take it more, I put more weight on that early in the prep.
Yeah, of course.
So if I'm 26 weeks out, I want to make sure I'm losing, pound and a half a week. I don't want to drop in 4 pounds a week, and I don't want to be, stagnating in that early on. But then as you get down into it, again, probably 6-8 weeks out, I'm not contest ready 8 weeks out, obviously, but my upper body's pretty close, and then you got to bring the legs in, and again, that's kind of a mental thing too, where you have to dig deep, and the scale might not go exactly the way you want it to. And
that's interesting, just because stress plays such a big factor at the end of prep, and when people see that 0.5 gain, they think they gained 5 pounds of fat, and it's really, it could
and
just
then
be
your cortisol
water.
shoots up, and then everything
and
goes
then
down.
you do look like a mess.
Right.
Very, very interesting. Yeah. So Lydia did ask another question. She said, at any point in your contest prep or in my client's prep, do we monitor or adjust non-exercise activity like NEAT in regards to like tracking steps, etc.? Why or why not?
So I'll let you answer for yourself. My answer, and I'm not a prep coach. I've never actually prepped people. I love helping out newcomers and giving them some advice, but I don't do that for other people. So for me personally, I don't track that, but I certainly do know if it's a low carb day and I'm not going to have much activity. I'll be honest. If it's getting to the cutting point down there at the end, there are going to be days when if I'm on 100 grams of carbs, I'm not going to be very active that day just because I don't have the energy. So I won't necessarily restrict myself. But I'm probably not going to do a whole heck of a lot.
Right.
So what do you?
I personally don't recommend tracking your steps necessarily. I was talking with Kurt Widener, one of the other core athletes today, and he mentioned something I thought was pretty interesting. So he said, like Brian mentioned, if you know it's going to be a low carb day, like mentally you might think, well, no, I'm just going to lay around. So if someone has that kind of bad habit where you're like, oh, like I'm eating 100 grams of carbs a day, or maybe even less, and they're like, well, because of that, I'm not going to move. Well, in that situation, then maybe if that person develops that tendency, then assigning them some steps might help them in the overall benefits, But also we have to consider and this is Kurt's words, not necessarily mine, but I really liked it, and I think it's something I'm going to be implementing. I mean, it was just today that we were talking about it. So, I mean, that's why it's kind of cool to come to the Arnold, because you all gain all these perspectives from everybody, from guys like you and Kurt and Doug and Carl, and I could take that away and implement that. So what Kurt mentioned was, if someone's on super duper low carb and they don't feel like doing anything, maybe their workouts are crap as well. Maybe they're not putting the energy into their workouts, And we all know Kurt. Well, most of us know Kurt, and he's known as the animal. And if he ate 25 more grams of carbs on a day, and maybe he mentally he's like, oh man, I had 25 more grams of carbs a day. Like I can go that much harder. And then they end up burning more in the end.
Right.
So you have to play that game of you have to evaluate the person, and if they're going to be, I don't want to say lazy, but if they're trying to cheat the system almost with being, if they're trying to lay around on a low carb day, then maybe assigning steps is the right thing to do. So I think that is, just like bodybuilding is, it's going to be an individual case. You have to evaluate the client. For me personally, last prep, not this more recent one, but last prep I found myself getting very lazy. This prep, I was a lot more energetic. I dieted over the summer. Last time I dieted somewhat over the winter a little bit. So I was enjoying the outside. I'd go ride my bike because I enjoyed it, and that activity, sure, it was more neat, but I actually liked doing it. So it wasn't really worked for me. So I didn't even count that as negative. I almost looked like it as a positive. All right, we had a question from the live audience here. That's why we had to cut the video. Actually, Patrick called in the middle of this. So Joe asked what to consider when you're new to the sport and you're looking to get into a new show. So Brian, go ahead and take that.
So sure, first of all, you got to think about what organization you're going to compete with. There's a lot of different strong organizations in different parts of the country. So if you're brand new to the sport, you don't want to be traveling hundreds of miles for your first show, and that's why it's important to choose a good coach that has a little bit of knowledge about the different organizations, what contests are near. And I know good coaches will actually keep a track of, okay, what kind of physiques are rewarded at a lot of these different shows. And so that's why, choosing someone good to work with is very important. For me, I kind of grew up with the WNBF, the INBF is the amateur arm, because I was on the East Coast at the time. And then the NANBF is a really big organization here in the Midwest. And then, of course, you've got the OCBs up and coming, the ANBF. There's quite a lot of good natural organizations out there. And again, it's kind of just, you don't want to jump into, the biggest show of the year. If it's your first contest, you want to kind of pick a local show and get in touch with the promoters. They'll tell you how many people have been in the years past. That's what's great today. Email addresses are out there. You can say, how big the show was last year. If there was only 2 people in a class, you might want to choose a little bit bigger one. And there's so many shows out there now, you can usually find one within a couple hours drive.
Absolutely.
And so just to get your feet wet, you need to know a little bit about the organization. That's why it's important to, again, have someone who has a little bit of knowledge and just kind of know what they're looking for.
Yeah, I think Brian nailed it. I always say geographic location first. If you're a first-time competitor, like you said, you don't want to travel. My big one is lighting, and lighting can really be skeptical, but that's where you have to do your homework. I will admit there are certain shows I just will not send my clients to because year after year they have poor lighting. We all know, or at least for us that have competed, you don't want to pose in the dark. You're not going to outmass anyone. You can't pose in a big shadow. We need good lighting so we can show our detail. And for especially, for any competitor, you want to pose in the dark. There's really no advantage to that. We want an even playing field. I guess everyone has to deal with it, but we work way too hard. So that's a big one for me. And then, a number of competitors. I look at websites, if they post pictures from years previous. A lot of people post the results. So like Brian said, you want to look with one that fits your current situation. If you're fine competing against 3 people, by all means, you could do a smaller show. But for most of us, we tend to draw more competition. We want to face 10 or 12 guys, so we tend to seek those shows out. The last question we did have was, a lot of you guys obviously saw Brian's picture on Facebook. Now he makes 3 Facebook posts a year, like we talked about for his maybe 2 for his social media usage. But anyway, a lot of you know that he most recently had surgery on his second leg, so everyone just kind of wants to know what the newest update is.
Yeah, so I've had both my legs broken. On
purpose.
On purpose. Yeah. So my injury was, I've been bow-legged my whole life, and so I basically grew up bow-legged. I knew it was a little bit bow-legged, but it never really bothered me. And then as I got older, I came to realize that my knees were aching, and when I went to the doctor, it turned out that all those years of walking around on the inside of my knee had ground away all the cartilage in there. So I was basically grinding bone on bone, and it got to the point where I couldn't squat, I couldn't deadlift, I couldn't even jog across the intersection of a street. Couldn't play with my girls in the backyard or anything like that. So I made the decision to have the surgery, and what they basically do is go in and literally saw through your bone and then stick a little wedge in there so that your leg straightens out, and then you're evenly distributed. So I've actually have decent cartilage in the middle of my leg now. So I've had that done both times. So course, being on crutches for 3 months is not so good for your quad muscles. I actually did the measurements. I lost like 20% of my leg mass.
Oh my gosh.
And so that was not a good thing.
On
But
both
on
legs?
each leg.
Yeah, wow.
And my calves shrank terribly too.
Oh, man.
But so that's not the greatest thing for a bodybuilder, right? But I'm back training. You know, I'm able to squat and deadlift now since about November, December. So I'm starting to get some decent numbers there. And you know, I've honestly accomplished what I want to in bodybuilding. You know, I set some goals for myself and I hit them all. But I mean, you know, it's a way of life. It's still my blood. And you know, I didn't think at the time that I was done, and I still don't. You know, I hold out hope that I'll be back, and if I can get some of the leg mass back, you know, I love the challenge of it. I love training. I love dieting, and so, you know, we were talking about the battle of the BWs, maybe.
Yeah.
So,
Eventually, guys.
So we'll see.
I told Brian he's not done yet because I got to face him one time. Then he can retire. Then he can walk off into the sunset. As champion, or maybe me as champion. But thank you guys for submitting your questions. You know, it's always good, like I said, to bring Brian out, get you in front of everybody. Brian, thank you very much for doing this, as always. Appreciate it.